we began learning, which we'll get into, I'm sure, kind of a whole new paradigm for what the Christian life is about, and
Mm.
this idea of God reveling in us having space and joy and peace in our lives and not driving us,
Mm.
constantly to do more and more.
Welcome to Stress Test. Thank you for joining us today. We have an amazing guest, Tommy Thompson, who lives right here in our hometown of Richmond, and he is a businessman and an entrepreneur. So, this is a great new perspective on stress and anxiety.
Yes, so grateful to have him on here. We love the Thompson family. Ironically, knew both his brothers, and just getting to know him. And I had a wonderful, wonderful visit with him the other day, and I said, "Man, we've got to have you on Stress Test because the stuff he's talking about." Well, you just finished his book, and
Yeah,
I just started it.
He knows what he's talking about. We're going to give you more information about how to find it. It's called Space to Breathe Again. And he really does a good job of explaining how we need to have margin, how we need to prepare space and quietness in our lives so that when something happens, we are already in the habit of breathing.
Yeah, so lots of overlap with what we're always
Yep.
about on,
Yep.
on this podcast. And so you're going to have a great time diving in with us. So stay tuned for more of Tommy Thompson.
Is that all right?
We are so excited to have Tommy, to have you with us. Thanks so much, Tommy Thompson, for joining us on Stress Test.
Thanks so much. I've been excited about joining in on this.
Yeah, I was so excited when we got your book, and
Yeah,
it was just really.
I just read it the other night.
Yeah, immediately just really connected with it and said, "Man, we can't wait to talk to you more about this and dive into just what a great, great book you wrote." But before we do any of that, tell us a little bit about your background. Take our listeners back as far as you want, but give us a little bit of background. I know you're a Richmonder, and it's nice to interview a fellow Richmonder.
Yeah, I'm kind of one of the rare breed these days that was actually born in Richmond, a
that's
true
true.
Richmonder.
True.
And so, went to school here. I'm the youngest of four, and then shipped off from here to Davidson College, where I got a bachelor's sociology there. Wasn't interested in too much other than sports, and in high school, I kind of came to faith, and so it was sports and the Christian fellowship, and then, oh yeah, you have to do little academics along the way. Um, so after college, I had really never done anything other than lots of sports and some camps, young life types of things, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And the Christian fellowship was meaningful to me, so I said, well, maybe I'll just go to seminary. Um, Not much of a call, but that was the way it happened. And,
That's amazing.
so I went to seminary, first to Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia, year as an intern at First Presbyterian in Houston, then came back to Richmond. After that point, was married after my first year in seminary to my wife, Wheezy. We're coming up on 42 years of marriage.
Yay,
And we
congratulations.
moved back to Richmond. And while I was finishing my last few credits in seminary, I was a chaplain at St. Christopher's School here in town and coach football, lacrosse, sports, fellowship. And really surprising to me, kind of got a little restless with, I think, the teaching world of teaching the same class to young kids semester after semester. And I'm a kind of driven, challenge-oriented person, and it wasn't kind of ringing that bell.
Yeah.
And I began talking with my brother, Lit, who had his own businesses, and he was describing all of these management issues and challenges, and it was interesting to me. And so he invited me to join him in business. And that was about, I guess, close to 40 years ago. that I joined him in the first business, which was a communications company, and helped him run that business. And numbers come easily to me, so I kind of took on the role and learned all around being a CFO of a company and also managing and running things. We ended up kind of quickly adding other businesses to the mix, and over the 40 years, we've probably been involved in, let's say, roughly about 8 different operating businesses across every specter: retail, manufacturing, service, video production, everything kind of real estate, everything under the sun that we kind of did together. Sometimes, a little bit more the two of us. Usually we'd join in with a partner. And so we just ran businesses. And we were kind of in the business of being in business.
Right.
And a lot of fun, a lot of challenge, a lot of stress as it kind of came about over years. But it was really rewarding in a lot of senses. But what I really loved was uh, what I did outside of the businesses, which was teaching at church. I love, my passion in life is to teach, to help other people grow, to create content. And so I kind of had this avocation of being a teacher, and I taught everything. Created a year-long class on marriage, had a several year class called Outrageous Living, all sorts of things. I loved doing that, loved mentoring people. And then I just did the business alongside of that.
Wow.
So we went along and began a family. My daughter was born in 1989, and that was also kind of right at a pinnacle of when we had 4 different businesses going at the particular time. One of them began to have some issues, and all of a sudden, the stress became monumental as I was trying to balance 4 different businesses, a brand new child, teaching at church, 2 different locations, Richmond, Virginia Beach, and became really overwhelmed, which is part of the story that then ended up being the impetus for the book, Space to Breathe Again, that I wrote. We began learning, which we'll get into, I'm sure, kind of a whole new paradigm for what the Christian life is about. And this idea of God reveling in us having space and joy and peace in our lives, and not driving us, constantly to do more and more.
That's good.
And so both Weezy and I began to slowly learn some lessons about margin and creating some space in our lives. And it was just such a relief to us. What we didn't really realize is how important those lessons were when we encountered the huge storm in our lives. And that was when, in 2010, our daughter, Perrin, Christmas baby, oldest of 3, was diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer. She was a sophomore in college. It had metastasized and was very advanced, and kidney cancer is not one of those cancers that they have a cure for.
Yeah.
And so that completely turned our family upside down, and we went through what ended up being a 6.5 year battle with her through the cancer. She eventually ended up dying the day after Thanksgiving 2016, lived so much longer than anybody ever expected she
Wow.
could with her diagnosis. So many amazing stories out of that. But what we found was the lessons that we had learned about creating space and creating margin in our lives was the very thing that was absolutely necessary for us surviving the unsurvivable in so
Yeah.
many ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. How would
So after she died, I had backed off a lot from the business to create some space to walk through those times. And after she died, I had kind of a big vacuum of time, and I really determined and talked to my brother and said, I don't want to just go back into running businesses. There's more I care about. I'm passionate about other things, and that's um, when I began Thompson Coaching because I love mentoring people, and began a podcast and started to write the book because I just realized so many people that aren't even dealing with storms in life are totally overwhelmed, stressed out, and overloaded, and don't really believe that there's an alternative.
Yeah.
And so I just went, this is just a sad state. And we're talking about primarily people within the church. And I
Sure.
thought, this is just horrible. And so that really kind of led to a whole new path for me of trying to help people grow, coach people, and help hopefully open people up to what I think is a better way and really God's way that He's designed us to live.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a long
Wow.
story, but it's kind
No,
of
that's
the
so,
broad picture of what's
yeah.
brought me here.
What an amazing
That's
story.
really impactful. Can you expand a little bit on this concept of margins and creating space? So you talked, like, I think a lot of times people do it after a tragedy, right? They need space to process. But
Right.
you mentioned the fact that you were already integrating margins, and that's what helped prepare you to handle the worst thing that could happen to a parent is to lose a child. And
Yeah.
so, never mind all the space that you need for business and handling stress at work and so forth. So, what can you explain a little bit what you mean by making space or making margins in your life?
Yeah, I can. Maybe one of the easy ways is to use an analogy, and
Sure.
that's a page in a book. And if you think about it, we really get very easily the fact that you need margins on the left, right, up, and down uh, within a page. Beyond that, you need space between the words. And one of the things, Sue, you'll uh, perhaps remember this from the book that I used as an illustration, is I took a paragraph that I'd written, and then right beneath it, I included the same paragraph with no spaces between the words.
Right.
And that second paragraph was much more efficient, but it was virtually unintelligible.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like margin is all about. Margin, creating space, space to reflect, space for relationships, space to internalize purpose, space to handle stress is what gives meaning to life. It's what creates rich soil as opposed to hard pan. Think of the parable of the sower. Hard
Right.
pan has no space in it and nothing can grow. And with space, we have this rich soil that's possible, whereby God can speak and we might be able to listen. And for us, what we learned before Perrin was diagnosed with the cancer and then took into that storm was that we needed the space to be able to step back and allow God to speak into the stress and the horror, honestly. And that was threatening in a lot of senses. A lot of people in that kind of situation, the last thing they want to do is to get quiet. But we chose to double down on being quiet. And that was the very thing that kind of helped us on a very practical day-to-day basis deal with the fact that, okay, this afternoon we're taking Perrin to get scans, and we don't know what these scans are going to show. Or, she called and she's in terrible pain. How do we deal with that? And so we needed that space. And I'm afraid too many times people wait for the storm to try to figure out space, and they have no muscles for it. And
Right.
it doesn't work. I think that's why so many families fall apart when a child dies or is diagnosed because they don't have the tools, the space to be able to process and internalize and handle the difficulty of that kind of crisis.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's good.
Man, thank you for sharing that, Tommy. Just so authentic to hear you describe what is a tragedy beyond our comprehension. And for most people listening, probably, although I'm sure many could connect very directly with that.
Right.
But you, in your grief, while you were going through this excruciating season of life, somewhere in there, you've shared with me before how you took a year. You decided that you needed more than just the regular margins you had been creating in your business life and stress, but
Right.
something much greater than that. Tell us a little bit about that and what came from that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It shows a lot about my nature, perhaps a not necessarily good side of my nature is, you know, in coming through the grief after Perrin died, and when I decided that I was really interested in coaching and writing and podcasting, I'm wired to be a very driven person. So space, the whole lessons of margin that I've learned is because I'm horrible at it. It doesn't come naturally to me. It
Yeah.
is survival for me to do it. And so I found that within just a few years after that, that I'd gone from this spacious life that I knew was necessary to survive everything that we were going through right back into a driven life that was, full of podcasts, full of writing blogs, trying to get my book out, then trying to market it. I mean, it's a whirlwind. And so I realized that, man, I have quickly let life get back out of control again, the very thing I was trying to avoid. And so then I thought, okay, well, I'll just back off a little. But my driven nature wouldn't let me. It wouldn't let me kind of just do a little bit of backing off. And as I was trying to listen to God um, through a series of events that was very, very specific, it became very clear that God was saying, I want you to back all the way off. I want you to take a complete break. And I'd never done that before in my life. But it was his way of saying, I want to heal you, and just a little bit of healing isn't good enough. And so I took that year off, called it a year of jubilee,
I love
after
that.
the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And I figured I wasn't exactly at 50 years of working, like the year of
Right.
jubilee, but it was this idea of a year both to celebrate, all that God had blessed us with, even in the midst of hard things, and a year to rest. So the concept of jubilee fit really well, uh, and I found that there was a real healing, a slow healing that took place over that year of a little bit of my driven nature and my easy tendency to derive tremendous identity around, okay, now I'm an author and I'm doing all of these things. And what one of the lessons that I learned in that year of Jubilee, which is so good, is I am so small. The things I'm doing are so tiny in the scheme of things. Uh, the things all of us are doing are so tiny.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure.
in
Sure.
this world and in history, and it just right-sized everything that's going on.
Wow.
That's
And it
great.
gave me this beautiful sense, both that I'm small and that God cares more about me than what I do. And that it just it's powerful. And I feel like it was a lesson that he gave me to begin to enter into this new season. I'm now 65 years old. and I'm still doing things, but I feel like hopefully, perhaps, and hopefully I'll continue to remember this lesson um, in an appropriate size,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
context.
Can I ask you just a really practical question about your year?
Yeah,
Because you don't just get rid of a driven nature. So, like, I know you're a big time golfer.
yeah.
In fact, you even, I think you said it on your
On his bio.
120 holes in one day. Like,
I knew this was going to come up.
yeah,
You can't let it go.
I can't let it go. But did
It was
here's
really a shame the sun had to go down
Yeah,
that
I
day.
know.
I could have done more.
Exactly. But
You
here's
must
my,
have a really good back.
that's right. You do. Here's my question. Did you find it hard during that year not to just start to drive towards anything? You released a lot of things, but did you find yourself driving towards this, driving towards that? Did that get in the way, or did that help?
I got to know, is that the year you played 120 holes of golf in one day? Did you become a,
No, actually,
was that your golfing
that
year?
was actually a good deal before that.
Oh,
you
okay.
know.
No, go ahead.
Uh,
You can answer his question now.
Yeah. Really, in a lot of ways, surprisingly, it wasn't that difficult for a couple of reasons. One, part of that driven nature, I I was going really hard, and I realized um, towards the latter part of that year before I did the year of Jubilee, I was really tired. I was going so hard and nonstop, and I was on a hamster wheel that I couldn't get off of. And so
Yeah.
when I began the year of Jubilee, it was actually such an amazing relief for me. It was like actually I could breathe again, and that's kind of that sense of the book. It was like, wow, it is so nice. It's so nice not to have everything scheduled. It's so nice to be able to play golf with just my friends and reconnect with them. And it's so nice to not be rushed in the morning with my quiet time. And there were so many pleasant pieces to it as I could begin to wind down that driven nature that I didn't find myself really wanting to jump back into that.
That's good.
So it was nice. But part of that was that I've had a taste of what margin is about.
Yeah.
I know that it is the place of joy and it's the place of peace because I've been there, I've seen the relief. So I could kind of remember this is the best place of life.
I love that you brought up breathing, that you found that you had a place to breathe again, because that was one of the things that I enjoyed about the book was so frequently you put a little square there that said breathing exercise, and you gave examples of how to just take space even while you're reading and processing somebody's words. And I do this also, and I'm sure I'm not as good at it as you are, but can you explain maybe for listeners what you mean by breathing? Like, what's a breathing exercise? How does it help you psychologically, physically? Anything you want to say about it?
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things is to think about the opposite of breathing, which we actually experience a lot. When you think of someone going really hard, they use the phrase, I'm trying to catch my breath.
Right.
And when you're stressed, you can feel in your chest how your breathing gets really shallow, with anxiety and things.
Right.
And so this sense of what's not supposed to happen, which is a short, shallow, tense thing that we do with our breathing, just shows that's not the way we're meant to live.
Right.
And so I learned not only kind of breathing exercises, breathing as an analogy of creating space, but that there's a practicality often of I just need to slow down, take a deep breath, let it out, do that 2 or 3 times, whether it's I'm stressed at a particular moment, or I just want to relax, or I'm preparing for bed. I find that the physical act of learning to breathe well parallels the emotional need for breath and the relational need for it and the executional need for it. It parallels. We're not just spiritual beings, so it
Right.
all goes together. And I learned that physical breathing can help with the other pieces too.
Right. Right. You're telling your brain to slow down and calm down too, which tells your body to do that.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I've got a book question while we're on this great book. In chapter 2, the elephant flying under the radar, which I love that title. You make this really great statement. We fear emptiness, so we fill every empty place. So here's my question. How does emptiness magnify anxiety? And how could it be a healthy indicator of stress?
Yeah, for me, one of the things that I've seen very much as I've talked about this idea of creating space and coached people is I'll often get a real visceral negative reaction to it. People go, I can never slow down. I can't get quiet. I don't do quiet. I need to keep going. I need to keep moving. And I realized that there's something deeper going on that we don't know how to be quiet, and we're actually afraid of quiet. And I think that's because when we create that space, it's like turning on a spotlight on our lives, and it exposes things, and it exposes that we're afraid of being shown to be an imposter. We're afraid that there's nothing there in the emptiness.
Wow.
And what I found in my own life and with people that I've talked to is that this idea of creating space involves taking a risk to create space, because we have to, in some sense, move through emptiness to find power, I guess, in the quiet and in the solitude. So now it talks about like the difference between emptiness and solitude, and that's a really important distinction, but that doesn't come immediately. These are muscles that have to be exercised where we learn to. And at first, I think it's very possible that emptiness exacerbates anxiety because it's the first time we've slowed down and listened. And when we listen, it might be a little bit scary what we hear,
Right.
about our lives. So it takes a little bit of courage to create space in our lives. It's much safer to just stay really, really busy and stay on the hamster wheel the whole time
Yeah.
until the storm comes.
Until you drop dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you differentiate between emptiness and solitude? There's overlap, but yet there's difference. Is the difference in my expectation or my motivation or my end goal, or is the difference? What would you say is the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think I've ever been asked that, but you know what I intuitively sense is that emptiness is the sense that nothing is there.
It has a
No.
negative connotation, don't you think, to most people? But you're talking about it in a sense of being a healthy thing, is just right to empty
it's
and make the space.
Solitude, I think, is finding myself there and
yeah.
finding God there.
That's good.
It's a quiet place. In a sense, it's an empty place. But in solitude, I actually find myself. And in solitude, I think I can actually hear God, which normally we're just too busy
Right.
and too loud. So that's what I would say, is it's difference. Empty is nothing.
Yeah. That's really good. So the emptiness precludes solitude. It has to you can't find the solitude until you have emptied yourself, which we see in Scripture, right? That concept of
Yeah,
fill my
that's
cup,
right.
empty myself, fill my cup. That's
That's
really
good.
good. I love that.
Yeah, that is really good.
All right, so I know you can't talk about all of these things, which were amazing, but you explained several rationalizations that we use to avoid eliminating anxiety and handling stress. And so I'm just going to read them for the sake of the audience, and then you pick whichever one or two or whatever you want to comment on that you think maybe that you hear most often from people. Maybe excuses that people most often say, but I've said all of these, so
You're reading his, not
I'm
my
reading.
my
no,
excuses.
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
All
no.
right, good.
I've done all of these, so I think
I'm
you hit
just
the nail
making
on the
sure
head.
whatever you're revealing
No,
right now.
Well, you could
These
say
are
the same about
Tommy's.
me.
These
These
are
are what I
Tommy's.
have said. Oh, okay. So these are the ones that you put down. It's not that bad, so it must be okay. If I were just better organized, I could do it all. I just need to prioritize better. I just want the kids to have the best opportunities possible. I know I'm exhausted, but it's not that bad.
Yeah, I think I've said that too
It's
much.
just a stage.
Mm-hmm.
We've said that.
Yep.
There's nothing I can do about my schedule.
Yeah.
That's a really big lie. I'm not hurting anyone. I think that's a profound observation that
Yeah.
there's
Well,
yeah, so much hurt.
you could probably tell, or I can tell at least, that that list is massively autobiographical.
But it rings true
Yeah.
for all of us.
It does.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, like an overview comment before talking about
Sure.
a couple of. We are really quick to make excuses because there's actually a scary part of creating margin and changing our lives. It's much easier to come up with some excuses why it's really not possible. Even though we desperately want a life of joy and peace and margin, we're terrified of it. And so we come up with excuses to allow us to continue to do the same things we're doing. And most of these, as I've used them, they're excuses. But I would kind of call out two that I guess maybe they just resonate with me right now. The last two, there's nothing I can do about my schedule. That's one that so many people very understandably can claim.
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys can claim that in a massive way with all of the responsibilities, all the brand new things that come on. And yet, I think if we stop for a moment and take it at face value, that is a very hopeless and untrue statement. There are many things we can do about our schedule, and very small things can make a massive difference in the quality of our days. So, some of the practicalities that I talk about, in the book are just the simple practicalities of having a few minutes margin before meetings. Before this podcast, I've been doing a lot of work here at my desk. I went, I just need to settle for a couple of minutes. That didn't affect my schedule. Showing up 5 minutes early to a breakfast or lunch, that doesn't change my schedule. And yet that little bit of margin can change the whole pacing and flavor of a day without changing your schedule at all. And yet, even beyond that, most of all of us have some ability, if we go out far enough, to begin to reframe our whole calendar, to begin to block some time, to begin to set some priorities. So the excuse, the rationalization, there's nothing I can do about my schedule, sounds good and it sounds reasonable in our day and time. And it even sounds kind of like something to brag about, like
Yeah.
I'm so important.
Right.
But the fact is, it's just not true. We can do a lot about it. And then the other one that I would comment about, this one really gets me, is I'm not hurting anyone. That is such a lie. Our marginless, stressed out, overloading, overloaded lives are killing us, and it's killing everyone around us. With the greater intensity being towards those that are closest to us. When I went through the real crisis of stress back in 1990 from all of the businesses, I put on a great face to everyone on the outside. And I came home and I was miserable. And I had no smile on my face. I had no patience. I was no good for anybody. It's horrible because there's even the greatest person will be harmed and harmful when they live stressed out, marginless lives. And so the cost of this is so far greater than we can ever imagine to us and to those around us. It's killing families, it's killing marriages, it's killing our purpose, it's harming us. So to even begin to claim I'm not hurting anyone, it's just like, ooh,
Yeah.
that one just really
Yeah.
gets me.
Yeah. Wow. And can I just follow up with that, because I think a lot of people maybe listening don't even realize they're making that excuse because they don't believe it's happening. And I wonder, I just listened to one of your podcasts, your latest episode in Space for Life. You have a great podcast, by the way. And
Thanks.
you had J.G. Carter on, and he
Yeah.
spoke about identity. And you had a wonderful conversation. I wonder, does some of that cross over here? Because my identity starts to be wrapped up in something so much in what I'm doing rather than who I am, that I don't even realize I'm hurting people with what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, and we will do quite a bit to protect our image, with people. We certainly do with kind of basic identity issues of having our act together and looking like we have our act together and doing a lot more than we're capable of doing just because we want to be one of those kinds of people that steps up and is limitless. We do the same thing with social media. It pervades everything. We live, in essence, an external life. And I think what JG was describing, in a sense, is how easy it is to become blind to that, driven nature, and to that we're even doing that, and not realize that we are stressed out.
Yeah.
I almost think one of the great little litmus tests is to hold our lives up against the fruit of the Spirit. And say,
Wow.
are our lives representative of joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control? And the minute I hold up to that and go, man, I'm having a hard time thinking of the last time I've experienced joy. Peace, give me a break.
Right.
Patience, I'm struggling. And that's just like a quick, self-assessment. And if those aren't things we're experiencing, which God deeply desires for us to experience, then we need to step back and take a look.
Wow. Wow, that's really good. And I love
Good.
thinking about what kind of fruit we're bearing. So good. I think that coming back to margin maybe be a good way to close this. You talk so much about margin and creating that, and then you even shared in your own story how quickly everything closes in, right? Can you give us a
Right.
few practical things that those people listening? Because how many times have we had this conversation?
I know.
And it's like we're redoing the same conversation over and over again, and we're cyclical in
We
it.
know how to get rid of the stress, and yet we don't do it.
Yeah. So
Yes.
help
Yeah.
us renew this. What are some renewal suggestions for making sure it stays
Yes.
there?
Yeah, I'll give a few, and I'm really glad that you asked that, but because one of my deepest desires in writing the book was that it would be beyond inspirational, that it would give very practical things to, okay, yes, I get this image, but how? And that it would offer a lot of very specific hows. So, what I would say as just a couple of like core hows is that we need to create space at the beginning of the day. The beginning of the day sets the tone for the whole day. And too often we've allowed ourselves to feel like the 5 minute quiet time is going to give us enough ammunition to get through the day. And I've realized that precious first hour and a half of the day gives me the strength to get through whatever the day is going to hold. So that's just a daily practice. And if people would do nothing else but that, it would begin to change everything. So that's one. The second one I would say is also it's practice the Sabbath. It was the first thing that Wheezy and I did, and it made no sense. If we couldn't get everything done in 7 days, how are we going to get it done in 6 days? And yet we were so desperate, we said, we've got to do it. God commands it. We've got to figure out a way. And that once a week reprieve of saying, one day I'm not going to do any work.
So good.
That was a lifesaver for
That's
us.
so good.
So that would be the second thing. And I was really very non-legalistic about how that applied. All I said in my mind was, if in my mind it qualifies as work, I can't do it. If my mind it's enjoyable and relaxing and restorative, I can't do it. Wheezy loves to garden. That's torture for me. It's Sabbath-like for her. It's torture for me. Going out on a golf course is the opposite.
Right.
So that's been a core practice for us. And then the other one is that I would suggest is find small full pauses in the day. Driving without the radio on, showing up 5 minutes early. This isn't really rocket science in a sense. A good beginning to the day, a once a week reprieve, a few chances to catch your breath intentionally throughout the day. It can change everything.
Right.
And the beauty of it is it changes our relationships. It enhances our ability to have purpose in our lives. It brings peace and joy. It does all those things. It's like all upside and no downside.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
The beginning of the day, the Sabbath, and these small little purposeful pauses throughout the day.
I love that.
That's great. It's like what you said earlier, small things can make a big difference. I don't know why we make it so hard to get in routine of small things that are good for us in some categories, like spiritually or physically, and yet we are chained to all these other routines that are actually draining the life out of us. It doesn't make logical sense, but maybe it's just the humanity in us that drives us towards things that produce versus things that just help us be, because we're spiritual beings. So anyway, I love that.
Wow, Tommy, this has been so good. And I know those of you who are driving, listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, however you're listening today, you're probably wondering, hey, how can I get more Tommy Thompson in my life? And
that's scary.
Wheezy's like listening, going, wait, what? Why would anyone ask that? No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, how can people find you on socials? I want to especially say definitely go check out your podcast, Space for Life, and get your book, Space to Breathe.
Oh, I walked out of the house without it. I was going to hold it up. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'll hold it up when we do the intro.
Yeah, we will. We'll hold it up.
Great, great. Well, thanks so much. I'm loving doing this podcast, Space for Life. It just offers so much opportunity to talk about how this impacts every little nuance of our being, with great guests who have found great creative ways to create space in their life. So the podcast is a lot of fun with guests, and it gives me an opportunity to run my mouth some, and that's always fun for me, at least. But I also have a website. It's real easy to find. It's TommyThompson.org, and
Great.
the podcast is on there, as well as blogs that I've written, access to the book, and because I do a lot of coaching, I'll also have some tools on there. Some kind of reflection tools about
That's great.
doing a whole life assessment and things that are fun to explore with a little bit of time. So the website, TommyThompson.org, is a good place to kind of get a little flavor of the things I'm doing. And I'm on kind of all the social media. I'll probably spend more time on Instagram, and it's at author _ Tommy Thompson.
Awesome. Well, go look for some more Tommy Thompson in your life. You need it, but most importantly, find some space for your life, and check out that podcast. Now, your guests are great on there, although I would say one of them is a little questionable, since you've asked me to be on your podcast. So I'll say with that one exception, no, but seriously, check that out. And Tommy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tommy. That was awesome.
Well, thank you. It's been a great new friendship that I'm so excited. I've heard about y'all for years, being a Richmonder, and I can't believe it's taken this long to connect, but this is just kind of a new joy.
Well,
So
we're
thanks
going to
so
change
much.
that, and not with 120 holes in one day, but I'll give you 18 at least. Or at least
Got it.
9.
We'll count on it.
I don't know about the other 9. I play 9, I suffer the other. Well, thank you so much, Tommy. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you for joining us as well on Stress Test. So we end our podcast a little differently than typically maybe. At least we are not familiar with a lot that do this. And we like to ask you to pray for our guests. So if you're watching or listening anywhere, take a moment right now and just lift up Tommy Thompson, lift up his family, lift up his ministry, his coaching business as well. So, Tommy, would you mind if we prayed for you?
Oh, I'd love it. Thank you.
Awesome.
Great.
You want to pray?
Sure. Lord God, we love you so much. Thank you for your hand of blessing and calling on Tommy Thompson and all of the various ministries and businesses that he's been involved in. You've blessed him,
thank
and
you.
you've used him, and you're using him in this new chapter. I just pray for you to do great and mighty things through him. Thank you for his humbleness and how he has served you. I pray blessing over his family and his calling in Jesus' name. Amen.
Great to have another Richmonder on the podcast today. And boy, Tommy Thompson, such deep stuff, and really enjoyed that. That was good. What'd you love? What'd you take away today?
There were a lot of things, and it's funny that
You've got a lot of notes here.
that you can keep
Man.
learning about a topic that you already feel like you've exhausted reading about it or whatever, but maybe it's just that I feel convicted. I liked what he said, that people often wait for a crisis to learn to make space, and they haven't built the muscles to be able to create space or breathe or slow down when life is ramping up, when things are becoming too stress-filled or too anxious or even trauma. And I think that is so true.
Yeah.
I mentioned
Absolutely.
the
Crisis
breathing.
comes, and then finally I say, oh
Exactly.
my gosh, I need to create space.
What he said about learning to breathe rather than catch your breath, that was a good take on I don't know, a topic that people talk a lot about, breathing exercises and,
Well, and he
take
said
deep
the
breaths.
opposite.
And he took it from the opposite side, which is we spend our life, right, trying to catch our breath, trying to catch up, moving faster. And I think there's adrenaline that goes with that. So there's a false sense of energy that happens when you're out of breath, but you can't sustain that. And
No, I love that too. And I think
anxiety comes in that. Yeah.
I think when we're always catching our breath and we're never taking these moments and creating this space, there's probably a reason for that, which is what I loved. One of the first things I wrote down was that God cares more about me than what I do. And maybe that's a source of some of our craziness, is that our identity is somehow wrapped up in what I do rather than who I am. Man, God just wants to spend some time with us and to breathe with us.
Yeah, and I that's not a concept that we haven't heard before. Like, we all
No,
know
of course,
that God loves us, not what we do, but yet we live our lives as if it matters what we do, and we live at this frantic pace as if that improves the importance of who we are.
And worse, we start to live like that is who
We
we are.
live in anxiety because of that. So I think that's the telltale sign right there. If I'm living in an anxious, out of breath mode of operation, then that tells me that what I believe about God is actually not what I believe about God. You know, when I say, oh, yes,
Well,
God loves me no matter what. But if I'm not living that way, then I don't really believe that in my core. I'm just using the verbiage that I know I should use.
Well, I know you teach a lot about finding the lies. And then the lies we're telling ourselves. And then
That was a
what
good
is
part,
the
too.
truth? And then what is the belief? And I actually wrote down one of those kinds of things when you started talking through all of those things in his book about
8 or 9
all
things,
the
yeah.
excuses as to why we avoid eliminating anxiety and why we avoid all these rationalizations. And it wasn't so much the rationalizations that stuck out, although just about all of them we were
I heard
guilty
myself
of.
saying, all of it.
It was actually this, that fear can actually be the source of why I rationalize. That I'm actually,
Right.
I never thought about being afraid of taking space to breathe or having empty space. But it makes a lot of sense as to why I fight so hard against it and why I
Right.
have all these rationalizations.
Yeah, he said we're afraid of quiet. We're afraid of emptiness. I thought it's true.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, we all say we want it quieter and calmer, but then we plan a vacation where we just are moving at a crazy pace the whole time,
Yeah, work hard, play hard.
which means that's not really a belief. It's not a core belief
Yeah.
that we're made for quiet.
And you took time out between Tommy and to get this book. So
I did, but I read it at a rapid pace was the problem.
no. I meant that you said that you.
Oh, yes,
you were
I
gonna
said I
hold
was
it
going
up.
to show the book. So here's the book. But even as I told him, I said, yeah, I read it the other night. I was waiting for him to call me on that and go, wait a minute. Because I skimmed through it, read through it really fast, which I am a fast reader, but still. But I highlighted. Like, I
Oh,
don't
no,
read
no,
without a
you-
highlighter, but
I've seen her. It's true. I've seen her on vacation devour books faster than
a
I
book a
can.
day, that's my goal. But
That's right.
yeah, there's something to be said for
No, but a really good
speed
book.
reading.
I've just started it, and you've already completed it.
Yeah, it was good.
And loving his podcast. So please go out and check that out.
And you can buy the book at tommythompson.org. I haven't looked it up on Amazon, but
Yep.
I'm sure you can find
sure
it there
on
too.
Amazon as well, but-
Space to Breathe Again. Pretty blue cover.
Such a great book,
Mm-hmm.
and love his podcast, Space for Life. So please go check out more of that. And as always, we're so grateful to be able to spend some time with you today. And come on and join us on this journey. We're just learning as we go. Every guest has been remarkable, and
Very gracious to us.
each one is teaching us some more lessons. So come learn with us. Don't miss an episode. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the podcast platforms, of course, and find us on social media. We'd love to learn about how you are finding some rest as well. Thanks for joining us on Stress Test.